Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive into Indian history. This one is going to be particularly relevant for our UPSC folks out there, and you history enthusiasts, too. We're continuing our exploration of modern India today.
It's exciting stuff.
It is, and we're diving into this amazing woman, Pandita Ramabai.
Oh, she's fascinating.
She really is.
Ah.
Especially for the GS1 Modern History syllabus. Her work and contributions come up all the time.
All the time. Yeah, you'll need to know this stuff.
You really will. And before I forget, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give us a like if you like what you hear.
Helps us out a lot when you do that.
It really does.
Yeah.
So, expert speaker, let's jump right in. Can you give us a little background on Pandita Ramabai? Who was she? What made her so influential?
Well, she's really one of a kind when you look back on her life.
Oh, yeah.
A testament to resilience and this unwavering commitment she had to social change.
Absolutely.
So she was born Ramadangre on April 23rd, 1858.
Okay.
In the Kanara district. And right off the bat,
Yeah.
she's introduced to this world of knowledge through her father.
He was a Sanskrit scholar, and he actually defied all these norms to educate his daughter.
Wow, that's so interesting. Teaching his own daughter Sanskrit
Right.
back then.
Right.
I mean, that was pretty radical for the time.
It was. So she goes on to become a well-renowned scholar. But of course, there were challenges, right? This is a woman pursuing education when that was really restricted.
It's incredible she was even able to do that.
Yeah, and think about this. A society where women are confined to the home.
Right.
Their access to education is incredibly limited. But she challenged those norms, and her understanding of those Sanskrit texts was so rare for anybody,
I can imagine.
let alone a woman at that time. So she gets invitations to lecture.
Wow.
At all these prestigious institutions like the University of Calcutta.
Oh, wow.
And she's given the titles Pandita and Saraswati, signifying just how exceptional her scholarship was.
So impressive. It's really a testament to her and the power of education.
Right.
It is.
Yeah.
To break those barriers down.
It's amazing how she was able to become so prominent, even with all those limitations on women back then. So her personal life must have been pretty intertwined with all this advocacy work.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Can you tell us a little more about that? Did those experiences shape her fight for women's rights?
Absolutely. So in 1880, she enters into a civil marriage with a Bengali lawyer.
Okay.
His name was Bipin Bihari Medvi. And that right there directly challenged the conventions of the time.
I bet. Now, I think it's worth taking a minute here just to explain to our listeners who might not be familiar with all the details of 19th century India,
Sure.
just why a civil marriage was so groundbreaking back then.
Right, well, think about it. Societal norms just completely dictated marriage customs back then.
Okay.
Intercaste, interregional marriages, those were so rare. And civil marriages almost unheard of.
Wow.
Especially for someone in her community, in the Brahmin community.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this decision speaks volumes about her willingness to defy expectations.
It really does, yeah.
Yeah. And pave her own path.
She sounds like she was really pushing boundaries constantly.
Yeah.
So what happened next for her?
Well, tragically, just 2 years after her marriage, she becomes a widow. After giving birth to her daughter, Manorama.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
And, she already experienced so much loss with her parents passing during that 1877 famine.
Yeah, that must have really impacted her.
Oh, it deeply impacted her, yeah. And it really fueled her to fight for the rights of women, especially those who faced similar hardship.
Instead of letting it defeat her, she used it to empower her.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead of just succumbing to those expectations of society, she used her experiences to fuel that advocacy.
That's incredible.
So shortly after her husband's death, she actually founded the Arya Mahila Samaj, or the Arya Women's Society in Pune.
So tell me more about this group.
Yeah.
What were their goals? And how did they fit into this broader landscape of social reform movements in India? Something that comes up a lot for the UPSC exam.
Well, the Arya Mahila Samaj, they were all about promoting women's education and fighting child marriage.
Okay.
Which is something that's sadly still prevalent in India today.
Yeah.
But you can imagine it was even more widespread back then.
I can only imagine.
So that focus on education, that was a key part of many of these reform movements at the time.
That makes sense.
Because it was directly challenging those traditional roles for women in society.
I love how she really zeroed in on education as that tool for change.
Yeah.
What were some of the specific things she did to advocate for this cause?
So in 1882, she testified before a government commission
Wow.
that was investigating these educational issues.
I mean, that took some real courage.
Imagine the courage for a woman to just address a government body back then.
Absolutely.
She advocated for female school inspectors.
Okay.
And significantly, the admission of Indian women into medical school.
Wow, I bet those recommendations were pretty radical for the time.
They were, and it shows you she really understood what it would take to make real change.
So inspiring. So, did these bold recommendations actually lead to any tangible changes?
You might actually be surprised to hear this, but it had this ripple effect that reached across continents.
Wow.
So her testimony and all the attention it received eventually made its way to Queen Victoria,
No way.
who was the Empress of India at the time. And this prompted Lady Dufferin, the Viceroy's wife, to establish the women's medical movement.
That's amazing.
Which was a huge step towards bettering women's healthcare in India.
It's really a perfect example of how someone's individual actions can lead to huge consequences.
Right.
Which is something I know the UPSC examiners love to ask about.
Of course, of course.
So not only was she pushing those boundaries in India, but she was having an impact internationally as well.
Yeah.
Expert speaker, tell us more about that work she did beyond India's borders.
So, in 1883, she heads to England to study medicine.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Right, especially for a woman from India during that time.
For sure. What was the medical landscape like for women in England at that point? I mean, were her experiences there different from what she faced back in India?
Yeah, I mean, England was definitely more progressive than India was when it came to women's rights and education, but she still faced challenges, you know?
As women, especially an Indian woman in the medical field.
So her time abroad exposed her to all these new ideas about social reform, which she ended up incorporating into her work when she went back to India.
So interesting. It seems like she was always looking for those new perspectives.
Yeah, always pushing herself.
Yeah, constantly learning new things. So did she meet anybody else while she was abroad who shared this passion for challenging norms?
So get this. This is a really cool connection. You'll like this as a history buff. While she's abroad, she meets Anandibai Joshi in the United States.
Oh, wow.
And Anandibai was the first Indian woman to earn a medical degree.
Oh, that's amazing.
She graduated from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, and Ramabai actually attends her graduation.
Wow, what a moment.
It was this huge event that brings together these two trailblazing women.
Two pioneers.
Right. And they both defied all those expectations to pursue their dreams.
And that really highlights this growing global movement for women?
Yes, absolutely.
At the time, and this is something that is a key theme for our UPSC listeners in your GS1 syllabus.
Yep, you'll definitely see this come up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about Ramabai's return to India and the institutions she established. So how did those experiences abroad end up shaping the work that she did back home?
So she comes back to India in 1889. And she's armed with this medical education, but also a global perspective on social reform.
That's incredible, yeah.
So she takes that and creates two amazing institutions. The Sharada Sadan and the Mukti Mission.
Okay, let's break this down. What was the purpose of these institutions? Were they connected at all to her earlier work with the Arya Mahila Samaj?
So the Arya Mahila Samaj focused on women's education and rights more broadly. But these new institutions focused on a very specific group. Child widows.
Oh, wow.
She saw how much social stigma and hardship these young girls faced. They were often condemned to this life of just poverty and isolation.
That makes a lot of sense given her own experiences with loss.
Yeah, exactly.
But for our UPSC folks out there, can you talk a little bit about why child widowhood was such a big issue in India at that time? What were some of the social and cultural factors going on?
Well, child marriage was unfortunately pretty common in 19th century India.
Yeah.
And the result was that a lot of girls became widows before they were even adults.
Oh, wow.
And then Hindu societal norms imposed all these restrictions on widows. Like social isolation, austerity, and even denying them basic rights.
It's hard to even imagine.
I know, and they were seen as burdens on their families and ostracized from society.
Just a reminder of how deep those practices were. So how did Ramabai's Sharada Sadan and Mukti Mission work to challenge those norms? What were they actually providing for these child widows?
So Sharada Sadan, which means house of learning, it provided the safe haven for these girls to receive education, vocational training, and most importantly, emotional support.
Wow.
And the curriculum wasn't just the typical academics.
Oh, interesting.
It included skills like carpentry, printing, even farming.
So cool.
You know, giving them tools to be independent.
It's amazing that she was setting them up for success like that.
Yeah, and then Mukti Mission, which means salvation mission.
Okay.
It kind of took that idea even further and created the self-sufficient community where women could actually live and work with dignity.
So she wasn't just giving charity.
Right. Yeah.
She was empowering them to break free and build their own lives.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, did she face any opposition to all this? I mean, given how conservative society was back then?
Yeah, you're right to point that out. She definitely had her admirers, but
yeah,
it wasn't without controversy.
Makes sense.
Her converting to Christianity led to people accusing her of using these institutions for religious conversion.
Oh, wow.
Especially since she was working with vulnerable widows.
I can see how that would happen.
Yeah. So it sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah.
And even opposition from some parts of Indian society.
So another layer to her story.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when you're fighting for social justice,
yeah,
there's always going to be resistance.
Exactly.
It really speaks to her strength that she kept going despite these challenges.
It does.
So did she get any recognition for her work in spite of all this?
Oh, yeah. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed.
Okay, good.
In 1919, she was awarded the Kaiser-e-Hind Medal.
Wow.
By the British government.
That's a huge honor.
Right. A high honor.
Yeah.
For her contributions to Indian society.
Now, for our UPSC listeners, it's so important to understand those nuances of awards and their context.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you break down the significance of that medal during British rule? So the Kaiser-e-Hind, it means Emperor of India.
Okay.
It was to recognize exceptional service in India.
Okay.
They didn't just give that out to anybody.
Right.
It was often for public service, education, social work, things like that.
Okay.
And the fact that she received it despite that controversy over her conversion really shows how much of an impact she had.
Yeah, it's really incredible how her story ties into so many parts of Indian history.
It does, yeah.
You know, the social reform, religious tensions, colonial rule. She's like this perfect example of how complex this era was.
Definitely.
Expert speaker, where can our listeners go to learn more about her in the context of her work?
Well, reading her own writings is a great place to start.
Okay.
Like The High Caste Hindu Woman. It gives you this firsthand account of her experiences and what society was like back then.
That's great.
You can also explore biographies and historical analyses of that time period, focusing on social reform movements and women's roles.
Those are good suggestions. I'm curious, is there anything about her life or her work that maybe isn't as well known that you think our listeners would find interesting?
Well, one thing that's fascinating is that she was actually a really prolific writer and translator.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, she published all these works on different topics like religion, social reform, even linguistics.
Oh.
And she even set up a printing press at the Mukti Mission.
No kidding.
Showing just how much she believed in the power of knowledge.
That's really cool. So it's clear she really dedicated her life to empowering others through education.
Yeah.
But it's also important to remember that amidst all these accomplishments, she went through a lot of personal tragedy.
For sure.
Expert speaker, can you talk a little bit about her later years and how her legacy continues to inspire us today?
Well, her later years were marked by both that continued dedication to her mission, but also the deep grief of losing her daughter.
Oh, Manorama.
Yeah, who passed away in 1921. Oh, wow.
And then just a year later, in 1922, Ramabai herself passed away.
It's a reminder that even when you're doing all this incredible work, you know, life is still full of those personal moments.
It is.
Her story's so moving. What do you think is like the most enduring part of her legacy?
I think it's her belief in education.
Okay.
Especially for women.
Yeah.
And the power that it has to transform. She saw that it wasn't just about knowing things. But about empowering yourself, becoming self-reliant, and ultimately changing society.
And that's a lesson that's still so important today.
Absolutely.
Especially for our UPSC listeners out there. How can they connect her legacy to those broader themes they're going to see in their GS1 syllabus?
So Ramabai's life really embodies so many parts of modern Indian history.
Okay.
First, she represents that spirit of social reform that was sweeping through India in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Her work challenged all those norms and paved the way for more gender equality. So it's not just about remembering her as an individual, but understanding her within that whole historical context.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And second, she really highlights how important education is.
Okay.
For empowerment and social mobility, especially for those marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And third, her story shows just how complex religious identity was in India. You know, her conversion to Christianity,
right,
while it was her personal choice.
Of course.
It sparked a lot of debate.
Yeah.
And it highlights that tension between tradition and modernity, which is something that comes up a lot on the UPSC exam.
It's fascinating how her life kind of touches on all those big issues and debates of the time.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about how our individual choices can impact big societal shifts.
It does.
Expert speaker, if you had to pick one key takeaway for our listeners, what would it be?
I think it would be the importance of courage and conviction. I mean, she lived her life defying expectations. She challenged those norms, dealt with personal tragedy, navigated controversy.
Right.
And she never wavered in her mission.
Yeah, to uplift women and give them those opportunities for a better life.
Exactly.
That's such a powerful message for all of us.
It is.
And a great point to end on.
Yeah.
History isn't just dates and events.
Right.
It's about the people who dared to dream and make a difference.
It is.
And Pandita Ramabai's story is definitely one that should be told and remembered and celebrated.
Absolutely.
We hope you all found this deep dive insightful and inspiring. And if you did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a like.
Yeah, it helps others find the show.
It really does. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into history. But until then, keep those minds curious and those hearts passionate about learning.
Always.